You know, when you open a dictionary, you generally expect words to be neutral tools. We just use them to describe the world around us. But imagine for a second a dictionary that functions more like a fence.
A fence, like setting up boundaries.
Yeah, exactly. A fence built entirely out of adjectives. You look at a word, and before you even know its definition, you are told exactly who is allowed to embody it and, who is strictly forbidden from stepping anywhere near it.
Right, so language stops being descriptive and becomes, well, basically a set of locked doors. It
Yeah.
creates this highly compartmentalized view of reality. The vocabulary isn't just labeling things anymore.
No, it's dictating how things fundamentally must be, which brings us to the core of today's deep dive. We are so glad you are joining us today.
Basically.
We are analyzing an essay from April 2011. It's written by an author named Xu Feng, and it's titled Women Are Beautiful in Their Gentleness. And honestly, it is a piece of writing that constructs one of those very fences brick by brick.
It really does.
The goal today is to deconstruct the author's deeply essentialist worldview on gender roles. Meaning, we are looking at his belief that a person's biology is their ultimate destiny and dictates a highly specific set of behaviors. We're going to examine how he uses natural metaphors, ancient cosmology, and his own personal memories to build and defend this philosophy.
And setting the parameters for how we approach this text is crucial here, because the source material contains highly charged, very rigid viewpoints regarding strict gender roles, along with these really sharp critiques of what the author labels strong women.
Right. Very sharp.
So our role as guides today is not to endorse these values,
Yeah.
nor are we here to debate them or take sides. Our objective is purely analytical. We are impartially dissecting the philosophical and cultural framework he presents just to understand the underlying mechanics of his argument.
Exactly. We want to show you the architecture of his belief system because understanding how these frameworks are built helps us recognize the broader historical and cultural conversations about gender that, still happen today.
This absolutely still happen.
So, okay, let's unpack this. To grasp the author's worldview, we really have to start at the foundation of his argument. He begins with language and nature, and how those two forces define beauty.
Right. He essentially opens with a linguistic land grab. He's dividing up the entire vocabulary of aesthetics.
Yes, he takes phrases like graceful and charming, tender as water, and as delicate as a flower, and he just declares that these descriptions belong exclusively to women.
He is completely inflexible on this point.
Oh, entirely. In the text, he argues that applying a phrase like graceful and charming to a man isn't just incorrect, it's an active insult. He claims it would imply the man is behaving like a seductive sprite.
Wow, and that translation, seductive sprite, is incredibly evocative. I mean, it establishes immediately that crossing these gendered linguistic boundaries turns a person into something mythological, something bizarre and unnatural.
Right, like an anomaly.
Yeah. The author is doing way more than policing language here. He is naturalizing a social preference. By tethering female behavior to elements like water, weeping willows, and blooming flowers, he frames gentleness not as a personality trait you might, adopt, but as a fundamental law of physics.
This stood out to me as well. He paints this vivid, really lingering picture of springtime weeping willows by a lakeside. He describes the tender branches swaying gently in the breeze.
The imagery is very specific.
It is. He claims they create a mesmerizing scene where entwined branches symbolize the mutual dependence of lovers. He even asserts that under the willow tree is the perfect place for love, specifically because the graceful swaying resembles the elegant charm of a woman.
And then he moves to water, right?
Yes. He states a woman's emotions are like water soft, smooth, delicate, flowing, and continuous. So I was thinking about this, and it's like the author is constructing a very specific linguistic box where the vocabulary of beauty is strictly reserved for softness.
That's a great way to put it.
But I'm curious about your take. Does the author see this softness just as pretty poetry, or is it an active force in his view?
What's fascinating here is the specific mechanical function of those metaphors. A willow tree is defined by its pliability, right? It survives by bending to the wind rather than standing rigid.
Oh, that's true.
And water is defined by its ability to yield and take the exact shape of whatever container it is poured into. I mean, he is describing submission without ever actually using the word submission.
Wow, yeah, it's an incredibly effective rhetorical strategy because if he just came out and said, women should be yielding, it sounds like a subjective social opinion, something someone could easily debate.
Exactly. It would just be an opinion.
But by wrapping it in the imagery of a weeping willow or a murmuring stream, he elevates his personal preference into a biological mandate. Because, I mean, you can't argue with a tree, you can't debate a river.
No, you can't.
If water doesn't decide to be fluid and a willow doesn't choose to be pliable, then for a woman to be anything other than gentle would be as absurd as water trying to act like a rock.
It creates a closed loop of logic. He establishes gentleness as an unbending natural law. And once that premise is locked in, he needs a broader structural framework to justify applying it to human civilization.
Right, and this is where he brings in the ancient stuff.
Yeah, this is where he reaches back into traditional Chinese philosophy, specifically the system of yin and yang.
So he takes this ancient philosophy and uses it as the bedrock for his natural observations. In his reading of the text, he equates women entirely with yin, representing the gentle, and men entirely with yang, representing the strong.
Very binary.
Very. He argues that when this specific disparate balance is maintained, meaning yin stays gentle, yang stays strong, the universe is harmonious. Righteousness prevails and peace follows.
Which is interesting because in traditional philosophy, yin and yang describe the fundamental dualistic nature of the universe. Things like day and night, winter and summer.
The natural cycles, yeah.
Right. They are usually understood as a dynamic, constantly shifting interplay. But the author basically freezes this concept. He takes a fluid philosophy of balance and hardens it into a static, inescapable law of human behavior.
Let's look at the physics of how he applies this, because it's wild. He quotes a concept: all things carry yin on their backs and embrace yang in their arms. He describes this configuration as a harmonious mechanism, a sequence of auspiciousness.
A sequence of auspiciousness. That's heavy.
It is. So think about the magnets on your fridge for a second. If a woman decides to act strong, the author says she is now carrying yang and embracing yin, because men, in his rigid framework, are naturally yang.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Yeah, so putting a strong woman and a man together is the equivalent of pushing two positive ends of a magnet against each other. You get that physical, invisible resistance. Two strong yangs clash. You physically cannot force them together without them repelling one another.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that magnet analogy reveals the absolute terror underlying the author's worldview. I mean, this isn't a simple dating preference for him. Pushing those two identical magnetic poles together signifies the collapse of reality.
The collapse of reality, that's huge stakes.
It really is. He believes that harmony requires disparity. It requires opposites fitting perfectly into their designated slots. Without that exact configuration, the entire social and cosmic structure shatters.
He paints a truly apocalyptic picture of what happens when that balance fails. If yang becomes gentle and yin becomes strong, he says the universe falls into disorder. Families break apart, marriages dissolve, and people's hearts actually turn wicked.
Wow.
Yeah, a cosmic failure trickles all the way down to corrupt the individual human soul.
But if the cosmos demands this rigid disparity, we have to ask what happens to the author's worldview when a real woman actually defies it. I mean, when society inevitably produces women who are strong, independent, and commanding, the author can't just ignore them.
Right, they exist. They are right there in front of him.
Exactly. Because their very existence threatens his univocal law, he has to pathologize them.
Which is exactly what he does in the next section of the essay. He launches into a harsh, highly targeted critique of the modern strong woman. Because cosmic order dictates these roles, any deviation is a disaster.
Total disaster in his eyes.
He claims that whenever a woman becomes too strong, she generates an aura of anger, resentment, melancholy, and sorrow. He literally describes a cloud of absolute misery following her around.
And he goes far beyond judging their outward social effect, too. He claims authoritative knowledge of their internal psychological reality as well.
He sure does. He asserts that if you look deep into the inner world of these excessively strong women, you will only find loneliness and struggle. He argues they can never find a soulmate. They are deeply unsupported.
They're completely miserable on the inside.
Yeah, he says beneath their tough exterior, they are hiding frustration and a profound grievance toward their fate. He is stripping them of their agency by insisting their strength is nothing more than a tragic mask for suffering.
It is a textbook defense mechanism. I mean, if a strong woman were actually happy, fulfilled, and thriving, his entire theory of the universe would shatter.
Oh, totally. The magnets wouldn't repel anymore.
Exactly. The yin-yang absolute would be disproven. Therefore, to protect his own ideological framework, he diagnoses them with hidden misery. The strength can only ever be a symptom of a diseased society.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Despite all this condemnation, the author claims he actually pities these strong women.
He pities them.
Yes, and the reason he pities them is that he places the blame for their existence entirely on men. He mentions a specific era in China when strong women were being highly praised in culture, and he notes that hearing this praise made his skin crawl.
Skin crawl, that's a visceral reaction.
Very visceral. But then he rationalizes it. He states it is understandable because the men of that time had become weak. They were no longer strong and masculine.
Ah. So he frames this era of strong women as a societal symptom of masculine decay.
Yeah.
He calls it a triple tragedy, right? A tragedy for men who have lost their natural yang, a tragedy for women who are forced against their natural yin to suffer loneliness, and a tragedy for the nation because the cosmic order is subverted.
That framing feels incredibly convenient, doesn't it? He's essentially saying to women, you only acted strong and capable because we men dropped the ball.
Right. If we had done our jobs, you wouldn't have to.
Yeah. If we had just been strong enough, you could have stayed gentle and happy. It completely erases the idea that a woman might actively choose strength, ambition, or leadership because she genuinely desires it.
It completely ignores her own will.
He reinforces this by quoting a folk song about how the girls of Alley Mountain are as beautiful as water, while the young men are as strong as the mountains. We are right back to the unarguable natural imagery.
It's clear the author is writing from a place of deep anxiety about the loss of traditional masculinity. By asserting that a truly masculine man will never deeply love a woman who is equally as strong, he's trying to build a fortress around his own identity as peak yang.
Peak yang. I love that phrase.
Well, it's what he's aiming for. And he doesn't leave this as a purely theoretical or societal critique. He feels the need to prove that his philosophy is objectively true in the real world.
Which brings us to the personal anecdotes.
Right. Grounding his essay in personal memory and historical legend to demonstrate the supposed conquering power of gentleness.
He literally brings it down from the cosmos into a middle school classroom. He makes a sweeping declaration that a woman's gentleness can overshadow all flaws.
All flaws. That's quite a claim.
He claims that regardless of her looks, her figure, her knowledge, or her status, if she possesses gentleness, she is beautiful. And to prove this, he recounts a memory from his time working as a teacher.
And honestly, the details he chooses to highlight in this anecdote are remarkably revealing of his aesthetic priorities.
Oh, they absolutely are. He describes a female student in his class, and he goes out of his way to state she looked very ordinary and had a rather unattractive figure.
Which is a rough way to describe a student.
Yeah, it's pretty harsh. But one day, this student approaches him after class to ask an English grammar question. And he admits right in the text that he has completely forgotten what her academic question actually was.
Wow. So the actual reason she was there?
Gone. The entire intellectual purpose of the interaction simply vanishes for him.
Because the academic inquiry is entirely eclipsed by her performance of vulnerability. What registers to him isn't her mind trying to grasp a concept. It is the physical manifestation of yin.
He meticulously catalogs her physical reactions, the way she blushed, how she nervously rubbed her hands together, the gentle swaying of her body, her incredibly soft voice.
He's basically evaluating her yin levels.
Exactly. He writes that this pure display of gentleness left an indelible mark on his memory and touched his soul so deeply that he found her overwhelmingly endearing. He even states that if he hadn't already been married at the time, he would have asked for her hand in marriage right then and there.
Over grammar question.
Over a grammar question. Imagine being that student, simply trying to understand a grammar rule, completely unaware that your teacher is filtering your nervous body language through a cosmic philosophy of gender.
It illustrates his mechanism of value perfectly, though.
Huh.
The intellect is irrelevant to him. The performance of softness is paramount.
Yeah.
And he applies this exact same filter retroactively to history, which leads to a fascinating interpretation of a very famous historical figure, the ancient Chinese strategist Zhuge Liang.
Right. Zhuge Liang is a towering figure, historically known as the absolute embodiment of military wisdom and intellect, and he famously married a woman whose historical nickname essentially translates to ugly.
Right.
The author explicitly acknowledges in his essay that this woman possessed great strategic insight, but then he insists that it must have been her gentleness that captivated Zhuge Liang. He says, otherwise it's inexplicable.
The mental gymnastics required to reach that conclusion are just astounding, but they're entirely necessary for his worldview.
It is a massive contradiction. I mean, wait, The author openly admits she had great strategic insight, which, if you are a military strategist yourself, is arguably the most valuable trait a partner could possess.
Oh, absolutely.
But he completely sidesteps her brilliant intellect just to force history to fit his framework.
This raises an important question about the mechanics of confirmation bias. Remember, a closed philosophical system forces the brain to rewrite reality to protect the system.
Right, because if reality doesn't match, the system breaks.
Exactly. The author's entire value system is built on his self-identification as inherently masculine and strong. Because he views himself as peak yang, he believes he can only be drawn to peak yin, meaning gentleness, which he calls the hallmark of angels and goddesses.
Wow. Angels and goddesses.
Yeah, he declares that gentleness has the power to conquer him completely.
So his logic basically works like a mathematical formula. Rule A states that great, strong men only love gentle women. Fact B is that a great, strong man loved a woman renowned for being physically unattractive but incredibly smart.
And there's the problem.
Right. If Fact B is allowed to stand on its own, Rule A is destroyed.
Therefore, his brain retrofits Fact B. He cannot conceive that Zhuge Liang might have been deeply attracted to a woman because of her brilliant strategic mind, because a strategic, commanding mind would be categorized as strong or yang.
Which means they would repel like magnets.
Right. In his worldview, a man of that stature loving a strong woman is cosmically impossible. So he simply overwrites the historical narrative, concluding she must have been incredibly gentle. It is the only way he can process the event without his universe collapsing.
It brilliantly showcases how deeply our personal biases shape our interpretation of literally everything. We rewrite our own memories. We rewrite hysterical legends. We project inner misery onto strangers we've never met, all to ensure the universe keeps operating by the rules we've decided are true.
That's spot on.
The author concludes his essay with a stark, unambiguous summary of this binary. He says, "Women are beautiful in their gentleness and unattractive in their strength." There is zero gray area in how he assigns human value.
He really leaves no room for adaptation or nuance whatsoever.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener? Why dedicate a deep dive to unpacking a text that is so rigid and, for many operating in the modern world, so provocative?
It's a valid question.
Whether you are insanely curious about the mechanics of philosophy or you're catching up on cultural studies to understand modern dynamics, seeing how an argument like this is built is vital. When you observe how a writer weaves natural metaphors, like the pliability of the willow tree and the yielding nature of water, together with ancient cosmology and highly selective retrofitted memories, you start to recognize the underlying architecture of traditional gender arguments that are still echoing in our culture today.
It gives you the analytical tools to see the fence we talked about at the very beginning. You stop merely absorbing the adjectives being used, and you start seeing the boundaries being actively drawn around human potential. You recognize when someone is using nature to disguise a social mandate.
Before we sign off today, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that takes the philosophical foundation of this source material and pushes it into a different light.
Yeah. So the author builds his entire worldview on the premise that a woman forced to be strong is a tragedy born of weak men. His argument relies entirely on freezing the yin-yang binary into a static, unchanging law where disparity is the only path to harmony.
Right.
But if you look deeper into the ancient origins of yin and yang, the core concept is actually about dynamic balance. It is about constant motion, adaptation, and the idea that the seed of yin exists inside yang and vice versa.
Like the dots in the symbol.
Exactly. So if we apply that original fluid philosophy to the complexities of the modern world, could true harmony actually mean something radically different than what the author proposes?
Oh, that's interesting.
Could it be that every individual, regardless of their gender, must learn to actively cultivate both their inner gentleness, their yin, and their inner strength, their yang, in order to truly thrive in a chaotic world?
Wow. If the universe is inside all of us, maybe we need the yielding water and the unmoving mountains within ourselves to be complete. We want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive as we navigated the language, the cosmic math, and the hidden fences of this text. Keep questioning the dictionary, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.